There's a game I found that is a bit peculiar, to say the least. Its title is Kitch's Cooking Class. It's a very simple game about a cartoony red-furred cat teaching you, the player, how to cook. Here's a quick rundown on how the game would usually go. It begins with the bright red cartoony cat stated before, jumping up from the bottom of the screen to greet the player. His style is clearly based on one of those older classic cartoons. He'll introduce himself as Kitch. He'll be the player's companion for most of the game. And he's one of two companions. We'll get to the other one later. For now though, starting off the game, Kitch will jump up and greet the player with a smile before saying, "Alright, Bucky, are you ready to learn something new?" After this question is asked, the player is then prompted with a yes and a no option. Selecting the yes option will cause Kitch to twirl around in a circle before putting on a blue cloth like that of a bib. He'll then clap his gloved hands together and state, "Alright, let's get to it." We'll get to the no option later, but for now, let's continue with this. When the animation is finished, the player will then be taken to a kitchen setting. Upon entering the kitchen, there will only be a few things for the player to interact with. A fridge to the right of the screen, 4 cabinets on top, a small counter in the middle, and a tiny brown book in the bottom left corner of the screen. Each time you enter here, Kitch will poke his head out from behind the counter, dart his blue eyes left to right before leaping out of his hiding spot to greet you. After doing this, Kitch will then prompt the player to pick a meal from the cookbook to get started, then waiting while tapping his finger on the counter. At this point, the player will now be able to pick the little brown book at the bottom left corner of the screen. Opening the book will present you with a white screen that is meant to represent 2 separate pages, a meal on each side and a number to accompany that meal. The further in the book, the more difficult and odd the meals become. Some of them even looking like just mush, if I were to describe them. After selecting one of these meals, you will then be taken back to the kitchen where another character will be introduced to you. A she-cat by the name of Ketcha will greet you with a wave. She looks practically identical to Kitch in every way, outside of the fact that her fur is a bright purple and her eyes are a bright red. At this point, Kitch will begin prompting you with a series of questions as you make the meal. With every correct answer, it will allow you to select different items around the kitchen. Each item you select, Ketcha herself will interact with them, bringing them over to Kitch, who will then begin prepping the meal. This pretty much sums up the game in its entirety. You pick a meal, Kitch asks you some questions about it, you select items that Ketch will bring to him to make the meal. But things shift the further along in the game you get. As stated before, a lot of the meals get really odd, some of them looking like just plain mush. One of the most peculiar things though is after completing meal 99, when you get to the pages, you'll see 99 on the left, but meal 101 is on the right page instead of just meal 100. This is the point where you do have a few options. While you could continue the game and get more complex meals, with a few weird ones mixed in there, you do have the option to snoop around and find out what this missing meal is. Let's say the player does decide to go looking around for this missing page. The first place they would need to start would be the fridge. I failed to mention how there are actually a couple of interactable objects on the front of the fridge. 3 of them. There are letters on there, meant to be magnets, a picture displaying Kitch and Ketcha together, smiling, and a small note on there. If you tap once on the note, it will full screen on it to display this message. We work so hard to only get so far. To make something that is perfect requires a little secret. Something I like to call my special ingredient. Viewing this note is the main thing that begins to shift the game. You'll notice it almost immediately after exiting from the note. Kitch and Ketcha will definitely still be in the kitchen, but Kitch's expression will be completely calm. Occasionally, he'll look to his left in the direction of either Ketcha or the fridge. It's hard to tell which one he's looking at. If the player decides to continue on with moving through the cookbook, the more odd meals will not only become more common, but Kitch will, more often than not, just have that stone face expression while creating the meal. There is still more you can do from here though, however. If you look back at the fridge, you can actually see a little bit of a second piece of paper poking out from beneath the first one. If you decide to double tap on it instead, you'll be greeted with something different. Selecting a note like this will reveal it to be Meal 100, the title of it being Sloppy Litter. Majority of the instructions will be scribbled out, all except for one, which states, chop up the meat. Returning back to the kitchen, you'll still find the duo standing there, Ketcha acting normal, smiling. Kitch, however, is acting different once again. He has a small smirk on his face this time, and occasionally he'll lick his lips while looking at the player, never taking his eyes off of him. At this point, you can't even interact with anything anymore. The only option left is for you to exit the game. Each time you return to the game now, it will always come back to that same screen, never changing unless you delete all the data. But there is still one more option you can do at this point. The no option on the title screen. I didn't mention it before, or at least go into detail, because before going through these steps, it wouldn't really do anything. Selecting the option would just have Kitch lean to the side, his shoulders drooping while saying, "Oh, really?" His ears would flatten in the process as he continued pouting. Now, after completing the steps, however, you will be taken to the kitchen, but Kitch will be standing alone in the dark. He'll be gripping the counter tight while staring at the player, smiling very wide. His bright red tail swishes back and forth aggressively, as if he's getting impatient. He then asks you to select a meal from the cookbook. Opening up the little book will reveal only one meal now, Meal 100, the sloppy litter. After selecting the meal and returning to the kitchen, Ketcha won't show up this time. Kitch will still be alone. In fact, the only real change is that a giant pile of something pink and red is over the counter. Kitch stares at it, smirking a little and licking his lips. Occasionally, his gaze will travel over to the fridge before returning to the pile of mush. To me, I always thought he was looking at the photo on the fridge, as if he was desiring Ketcha to be there to make this meal with him. I never knew for sure, never bothered to try and find out. At this point, there aren't very many options you can do. You can still look closer at the image or the note on the fridge, but nothing else. If you do tap, however, on Kitch, he'll actually interact with something as a result. He'll pull out a knife before beginning to hack away at the mush. After he chops away for a little while, he'll then turn his gaze to the player before saying, "All right, Bucky, are you ready? This is a special meal I make on very rare occasions. The options yes and no will then appear once again. If you choose no, Kitch will stare at you for a little while, watching you, then smile, before suddenly chucking the knife in the direction of you, causing the screen to go a bright red and ending the game. However, if you select yes, he will then begin to chop away at the pile once more, before smashing it together a little bit and getting it into the oven. As he waits, he will then rub his hands together excitedly before stating, "Oh, I can't wait. Don't worry. Trust me, I put a lot of work into this meal to ensure that it would come out perfect. You're gonna love it, Bucky." At this point, Kitch will then prompt you with another question, asking whether or not if you remember the next step for the meal. You can answer yes or no. Selecting the yes option will cause Kitch to shrug and snicker to himself before saying, "If you say so." However, selecting the no option, he'll pause for a moment, then shrug and say, "No worries, I'll teach you later." After this, Kitch will then pull the food out from the oven. Then taking 2 slices of bread, he will plop the mush in between them, making a sandwich out of it. After creating his meal, he will then ask the player one final question. "What do you think of the meal? Does it look perfect to you?" The answers yes and no will appear one last time. If the player chooses to select yes, Kitch will go silent for a while, long while. The screen will zoom in on him before he then takes a huge bite out of his sandwich. A red and yellow, chunky fluid will start gushing out from the contents inside. However, if the player selects no, Kitch will stare at them silently, just like before, and the screen will zoom in. But this time, Kitch will leap at the player before the screen goes red, ending the game. This does not always happen, however. It's very, very random. I've played through the game several times, and this part is the part that seems to change the most. I've actually been attacked by Kitch several times after selecting the yes option here. And other times when selecting no, he may shrug and just take a bite out of his sandwich. I'm not sure what the point of this game is supposed to be. If it was genuinely meant to teach people to cook, or just to be something to lure in kids and spook them a little. Maybe even a short horror game for adults. I do not know. The only thing that I do know is that this game, Kitch's Cooking Class, this childlike game, has some really dark implications.